Coincidentally, hello, everybody hear me? We're on. Coincidentally, that was one of my job titles, Principal Senior Responsible for Big Website. I've since changed that to Principal Senior for Responsible for Very Small Websites, because the topic we're talking about here today is mobile. So as I always like to kind of get a sense of what everybody has in their pockets, does anybody have one of these Apple devices on them? iPhone, okay. One or two of you, that's nice. Who is sporting the Android? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm kidding. Jeez, it's early. You guys got to take a joke. Who has one of these? Okay, a couple people with the BlackBerry. How about a Nokia? Not too bad. Now here comes my favorite question. Who used to have one of these? Okay, a couple more of you. Anybody with a Windows 7 Series F trademark incorporated? Okay, three of you. I am one of these iPhone people. As you noticed, it comes complete with smugness and disdain for other types of phones. But that's me there, and this is me on the Twitters. So in case you guys want to follow up or talk about anything I discussed today, you can find me on the interwebs pretty easily. The thing I want to talk to you guys about today is a relatively simple little philosophy that I've been talking about for a couple years now. And that philosophy is that when the time comes to design or redesign our websites and our web applications, I think it makes a lot of sense to start thinking about the mobile version first. And the reason why I think it's an interesting idea, because for years we did the opposite, right? For years we started on the desktop, and maybe you were able to do some things on mobile. Maybe you were one of the lucky few people who fought tooth and nail to get some kind of contract with some kind of carrier, to have something somewhat accessible somewhere, and then nobody ended up using it anyway, despite your best efforts. But things have changed really dramatically, and starting with the desktop, I believe nowadays becomes more of a backwards way of thinking about things as opposed to a forward-thinking way of doing things. But you don't have to trust me. There are other people who make a lot more money than me, therefore they are more knowledgeable than me, and therefore you should trust them more. So someone who makes a lot more money than me is the guy who used to be the CEO of Google. He's now the chairman of Google, Mr. Eric Schmidt. And he makes the point that a lot of folks in Google and beyond are starting mobile first. And in particular in Google, the reason why they get to do that is because programmers thought it's cool and programmers get to do whatever they want at Google, right? So in all seriousness, though, the reasons he calls out about why mobile first is an important philosophy is he sees the mobile phone as this, and I'm going to talk like a CEO for a second, high volume endpoint of three parallel tracks that really redefine the personal computing space. Okay, now the bullshit meter's off. What he's basically saying is the processors in these devices are as powerful as what NASA used to send someone to the moon. We have constant connectivity now through the permeation of 3G and beyond networks. And then also we have a lot of our assets stored in the cloud. So this combination of stuff in the cloud, processors that can actually do things with it, and connections to it is a very interesting sort of triumvirate that makes mobile first viable. This is my friend Kate Aronowitz, who's responsible for front-end engineering and design over at Facebook. And recently she kind of espoused the same philosophy and talked about how Facebook is starting with mobile first on a number of their new products. In particular, things like Places and some of the new stuff they're rolling out soon, so stay tuned on that. This is the CTO of Adobe, who, Mr. Kevin Lynch, who again, when he did the keynote for Adobe Max, which is the big evangelism conference that Adobe does for the 5 people that build Flash websites, he made, these are jokes, you're allowed to laugh. There we go, that's better. He made the same point that building mobile first is sort of a very big transition, and in particular, he feels it's bigger than the PC transition. But I don't think you should do things just because other people tell you to do things. So I want to talk about the real reasons why mobile first is a viable strategy for a lot of people. And hopefully moving forward, most people, if not all. And those 3 reasons are growth, which gives us big opportunity, constraints, which really help us focus down on the things that matter for our business and for our customers, and then capabilities that frankly we don't have in many of the other devices that we formerly knew as the personal computer. So let's look at the first one. Fancy transition. Many of you are probably familiar with the research Morgan Stanley did about 2 years ago, where they just mined a whole bunch of data everywhere and anywhere and extracted what they viewed as sort of the mobile internet trends. And the most important thing to note with this transition is every time we go through this computing sort of cycle, the number of devices in people's hands that connect to the network increases by an order of magnitude, right? And so projecting forward roughly 5 or so years, we're looking at a state where people are going to have multiple devices connected to the network. So does anybody have more than one device that connects to the network? Okay, keep your hand up if you have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, I live in Silicon Valley. My whole house is connected to the network. My toilet was tweeting earlier that it's really pissed off at me. But when you start to see how many people have more than a single device connected to the network, you start to understand that how we can get to a point where there's more networked devices in people's hands than there are people in the world. Right? Because there's roughly getting towards 7 billion people, and here we're talking 10 billion plus devices. The other more interesting thing is, okay, it's nice to look at numbers, and people have been saying mobile is the next big thing for many years. Has anybody heard this? Mobile, next big thing, right? Sort of been said. But now people are actually making real businesses on mobile. So in the case of something like e-commerce, right, you see eBay globally making $2 billion. By the way, eBay in the United States has 50% of total mobile commerce. 70% of that comes from their iPhone app. Just sort of a fun statistic. But even on the mobile web, you're seeing big retailers like Best Buy in the United States that sells electronics. Each and every single year, they more than double their mobile web users. Social is another thing, in case you guys haven't been paying attention on the web. I think it's some kind of new thing. Anybody get an invite to one of these social things? But what's most interesting to me about the growth of social outside of all these crazy numbers is in Japan, 4.5 years ago, the largest social network, 14% of their page views were on mobile. Today, 85% of their page views are on mobile. So within 4 years, you sort of went from it being the minority case to being very much the majority case. And it's also possible to build totally new audiences. There's a photo sharing service called Instagram that within 3 months, they hit 1 million users. 6 weeks later, they hit 2 million users. That's not so surprising on the internet, but it is surprising when all they have is an iPhone app, right? They don't even have a way to register on the web to start using the service. And everything else is growing too. Mobile search, mobile music, email usage. Pretty much everywhere you look and see a real business on the web or on the internet, their business is becoming real on mobile as well. But I don't expect you to remember all these numbers. Those numbers are nice if you have a boss or a client that you need to convince, hey, this mobile thing is interesting, right? You can actually do something here. The one thing that I think is the most important out of all these data points to remember is this. So in that Morgan Stanley research, which was published 2 years ago, they made a bold prediction that within 2012, the number of global shipments of PCs, laptops, and notebooks will be surpassed by the number of global shipments of smartphones, right? And this is a very big deal. All of a sudden, more people are going to be able to access the network through smartphones than through what we traditionally knew as the personal computer. Well, everybody thought, oh my gosh, this is such a, bold prediction. What's going on here? It came true 2 quarters ago. So over 2 years early, this happened, right? And at the time, this was an outlandish prediction. And this is sort of the main theme of all these data points happening around mobile right now. The rate of growth is faster than anybody anticipated, despite them anticipating pretty crazy things. I believe the smartphone market total grew 96% in Q3 of 2010. And this is a $10 billion market. I have no idea any other market valued at $10 billion that grows at something even close to 90%, right? It's really once in a lifetime kind of stuff. And well, what does that mean? It means that because of this growth, we're seeing a transition in usage. So looking at ComScore data, they saw the home use of personal computers, those things underneath your desk that you squirt with an air can because the cat hair gets inside of them. they saw that use dropped 20%. And the reason why, they claim, is people are spending more time getting things done on their smartphones and their tablets and other connected devices. Right? So this is a pretty big shift. And if you consider the amount of smartphone penetration right now, in a market like the United States, only 35% of people have a smartphone. And we're already seeing shifts like this. Even on the web, and this is all web-based email sites, not just Gmail. In a single month, in 2010 in the US, visitors to web-based email sites dropped 7%, and people accessing email on mobile jumped 36%. Right? So very early days, but you're already seeing this swing happen. And it's not just a transition in use, it's also the creation of new use. So this is a service called Yelp that does local restaurant and service reviews. Of their 32 or 45 million global users, 7% of them use Yelp on mobile devices. That 7% of their total users does more than 35% of all their searches, right? So that's new use. Other new use, same thing on Yelp, sticking with Yelp. Every other second, somebody on a mobile device using Yelp calls a business, gets driving directions. The real estate site Zillow has, all of a sudden, they have a new audience of people who are active buyers in the neighborhoods where they want to buy a house using their service. Right? Again, new opportunities, new uses. And now this number on Facebook, I got to update this, 250 million active users. The people that use Facebook on their mobile device use it twice as much on the desktop as people who don't use the mobile version. So shift in use plus lots of new use emerging. And those of you who are astute might say, okay, well, smartphones, right? Isn't everybody on the smartphone using their native applications? So when you're on your fancy Android Nexus S and you're twittering away, isn't that a smartphone app? Well, it's true that Twitter gets a lot of activity on mobile. 40% of their tweets are sent via mobile, 16% of new users start on mobile. And given that, we can ask, well, what are the top ways people access Twitter on mobile? Anyone have an idea? The website, okay. Any other ideas? iPhone app? SMS? Okay, all good votes. Turns out the #1 mobile client is mobiletwitter.com, which, by the way, they redesigned last night and published out. You can take a look at it. They just did a whole overhaul of their mobile web experience. #2 is SMS, then Twitter on iPhone, then Twitter on BlackBerry, and all the other clients sort of drop off there. And in the browser, this is just in the mobile browser in 2010, they had a triple-digit increase in the number of people using the service, right? And this is something you see over and over again. So what it amounts to is, this is kind of the high-level overview, that more people are going to use the web on mobile than are going to use it on the desktop, which is why we care so much about mobile, and we want to start with mobile first. But just last year, we had 600% growth in traffic to mobile websites. The average person that has one of these smartphones visits up to 24 different sites a day. And of the sites visited, the most popular ones, Facebook, Google, Yahoo, and all that, they're only responsible for 40% of all visits. So what that means to you is whatever site or service you have, chances are people are going to start hitting it on mobile because they're hitting a bunch of different sites and because the big guys don't own everything. Right? And even our Opera Mini friends are seeing really big growth as well. But I don't think this is just an opportunity to ride a big curve up, right? I mean, that's definitely something many businesses and organizations and people are interested in doing. But I'm also a fan of the fact that designing for mobile first and thinking about mobile first allows you to create a better overall experience, not just an experience that gives you access to this new growth. This is Mr. Joe Hewitt. He made this application. Has anybody seen this thing? Right? And I love this quote from him, that his goal was initially to make a mobile companion, but really quickly he figured out, oh my gosh, I can make something actually better than the desktop. And so how does that happen? That's where we jump into the next two pieces here. So the first part was really the growth and the opportunity that presents for us. There's this shift in usage between what was a personal computer to what actually is a personal computer, your mobile device. There's new usage being created, right? And it's not just growth in applications when we talk about mobile internet growth. The mobile web is growing right alongside, and by many counts, it's growing a little bit faster. Right? I think ComScore ran a global survey recently where they showed the amount of people who use the browser in addition to apps is actually higher than the number of people that use apps in addition to the browser when you look at smartphones. Okay, so that's growth. Now let's talk about focus. How does mobile help you focus? Well, I'm one of these people that believes design is the art of gradually applying constraints until an elegant solution remains. And mobile has a bunch of constraints that are really nice for that. Constraint number one is we spent years on the web arguing about how many pixels we have. Was anybody part of these conversations? Yes, and so we finally got to, okay, 1024 by 768, everybody agrees. And then along comes something that's sort of a typical smartphone resolution, and 80% of the stuff you had on your page is gone, right? Which I think is fantastic. The reason why I think is fantastic is because it forces us to focus. So, something like the focus we get from a travel website. This is a US airline called Southwest, and you can see they're really clearly focused on exactly what people want. Now, have any of you studied visual perception? Is anybody familiar with this concept called change blindness? So change blindness is when you see two images that are very similar, and only one or two things change, it's hard to see that change. So I just want you to be aware of that phenomenon when I make this transition, because you may not see the difference. So desktop, web, mobile app. Now hold on, I'll do it again so that you guys can see. Okay. Now what's on this app? Well, how does this airline make money? They sell reservations, they sell car reservations. What do their customers want to do? They want to buy that stuff. They want to see if they can check into their flight, see the flight status, and manage their rewards. So what the business goals are, along with what the user needs is, and that's it. Nothing else. Because frankly, there's no room. They had to get rid of all this crap because it can't fit. Right, this is why this is such a beautiful constraint. And if you start from mobile first and you get down to this focus, this prioritize, what's our business for and what do our customers want to do, then when you go back to the desktop, maybe you end up with something like this. Right? A lot more focused on what the company is doing and why their customers give a crap, instead of every single marketing department fighting for their current promotional material to appear on the front page. Unfortunately, the desktop web, and I use these phrases, desktop web, just because we don't have a good vocabulary yet, but the web experience you get in a big screen is sort of like a carp in a bathtub, and it keeps growing to the size of the bathtub, right? It'll grow and grow until it fills all the space it has, and that's what we do with pixels on the web. We just shove them in there until there's nothing left because we can, because it's empty. Put something there. You may be familiar with a site called Flickr. Chances are you're not familiar with all of Flickr. It has grown over the years, but when it came time to do their mobile web solution, they had to go from 60-something options down to about 7. Again, 80% of the crap is gone when you have to start thinking about these smaller screens. And so what do they have here? They have the things people actually use Flickr for. They check in on, has anybody commented on my photos or favorited any of my photos? What photos have my friends uploaded? And then kill some time looking at something interesting or photos near you. Right? Once again, that same level of focus. And how do they get that focus? Well, they have to know their audience. They have to understand what their audience is doing and why. And once again, if you design that takes into account your customers is design that takes into account your business. One more example of how screen space can help us focus. This is another travel site. I have a thing for travel. This is the page on the site called Expedia that tells me when my plane leaves. This is the part of the page that I actually care about. Right? The rest of that page was basically made by a lawyer pooping out legalese and promotional crap. I mean, I don't even know what 90% of that stuff is. Let's compare that to the mobile experience. And actually, let's take it a bit further. Their mobile web app, when you turn it on, it has this little text that says, "Where should you be? Flip it and see." You flip it sideways, and it says, "Get your butt over to Terminal B now because your flight's about to take off." Right? I mean, could this be any different? This page, where I have to hunt down for the text to flip it, and here you go. Right? I don't even think I need to illustrate that more. So screen size is a constraint that when we start with mobile and we design there first, it forces us to focus. Another thing that forces us to focus is the fact that most of our networks, I guess T-Mobile out here, does this kind of crap. Right? Yeah, in the US, it's AT&T that does this kind of crap. Everybody's got their own thing. So another constraint we have is, frankly, you don't have kind of, and many of us sometimes at home don't have the same kind of network connectivity, but at work and other places we mostly do. We care a lot about how fast things are, right, on mobile, how much bandwidth things eat up. And so we spend a lot of time, and I'm not going to get into all these details about how to go optimizing things. But when you start for mobile, speed becomes really, really important, and performance becomes really important, and optimization of everything you're downloading and sending down the wire becomes really, really important, which it turns out is actually great for the desktop as well. So start with mobile, make it fast enough for mobile, and when you get to the desktop, you're going to have fantastically fast things. Right? If it's fast enough to download over your little T-Mobile crappy 1.5 bars, then when you get to a fat pipe, it's going to be poof. You won't even notice that it was loading. And even things in the hundreds of milliseconds have a huge impact, this is all desktop data, on how people interact, what they buy, how long they stay, everything. These things actually have long-term effects too. Google did a study where they killed performance in search, and 3 weeks later, people were using the product 20% less still, even after they brought back performance, right? And then the other thing that I think is really interesting about mobile is these different modes of usage. And it's a fuzzy topic, but I still want to illustrate at least some of the emergent data that I'm getting my hands on. So when you're at home and you got your big screen, you're always on power supply, your consistent network, your keyboard, your mouse, your chair, and your coffee. These are some of the things that define the environmental context under which we use our desktop, laptops, and notebooks, right? Usually we're at a desk. Usually we're spending a good amount of time there. Granted, there are exceptions to the rule. We may be on the couch. We may be in the bedroom. We may be on the toilet. By the way, one of my favorite mobile statistics lately is 39% of people use their smartphones on the toilet, which means 61% of people are liars. You can read it either way. Whereas when we get our hands on our fancy Android devices, we got a small screen, the battery's going to die, the network's inconsistent, we increasingly are using our fingers to interact with these devices, and there's environmental sensors that sort of know where we are. Sometimes they know if there's ambient light near us, right? Sometimes they know the direction we're facing. And all these things together make this device a lot more personal. It fits in your hand, you touch it with your fingers, it knows where you are. It has a fully integrated ability to call anybody you know, theoretically, right? And I think that changes the equation when we design for stuff between these different sort of environmental factors. But other things that define how we think about mobile is, where are people using these devices? This is the stereotypical image, somebody on a street trying to get directions for something, right? Find a restaurant near me, sort of the stereotypical mobile use case. But looking at data of where people actually use their smartphones, 84% of them use them at home, right? In between kind of cooking dinner, you're checking your email, or you're on the couch watching TV and you're playing a quick game of Angry Birds or something like that. Miscellaneous times, waiting in line, at work. And so what this actually leads us to say is, well, people use these devices pretty much everywhere and anywhere. And I think that is actually a distinct factor of mobile. When's the last time you saw somebody, waiting in line with their desktops tethered to their butt? Doesn't happen, right? Or some guy on the subway kind of has their laptop balanced on their head. I mean, sometimes, maybe, but in most cases, somebody's doing this, right? And I'm just going to show this really quickly, because this Microsoft video, I think, illustrates this use case of the fact that you can use these things anywhere and everywhere inspiration strikes, right? You see something, you can act. You got a couple minutes of downtime, like kids do. I think kids have free time. They used to work. Nowadays, they get off scot-free. And then you could take a quick thing, and then he's going to bring the device over to his dad. She's going to share some things with her friends inside a record store, right? All these little kind of moments throughout the day, whenever inspiration strikes. Right? So anywhere and everywhere is really a defining characteristic of this medium. And because you can use things anywhere and everywhere, many times we have partial attention from people. Even if it's at the house, right, and you're on the couch, the TV may be on, or somebody may be walking in. You're not sitting in your cubicle for multiple hours typing away at your keyboard, which is in many cases the way we use desktops and laptops. So I like to think of people, because in many cases they're partially attentive to what we're doing, as one thumb, one eyeball, because it kind of forces you to focus down on making things simple. And even when they aren't one thumb, one eyeball, when they're two fingers, two eyeballs, the simplicity you get from this approach makes it more fun to interact with things like the Angry Birds. The last thing I want to talk about with defining, this sort of environmental context and use of mobile, what makes it distinct. We talked about some of the ergonomic factors. We talked about where people are using it. So another interesting consideration is when. When do we pull out the mobile device? What's going on there? This is data from a service called Read It Later. And what it illustrates is when people read articles they save for later. Most of us, the answer is never. Read it later. Don't ever do it. But it turns out some people actually read things. And on the desktop and laptop and notebook world, you see people are asleep, then they read stuff, then they eat dinner, then they read stuff, and then they go to bed. It's a pretty consistent trend. Contrast this to when iPhone users read things. And the first thing you notice is that they're still pretty much reading any time, right? There's activity throughout the day. But the other thing you notice is that when you contrast it with computer users, the spikes are a little shorter and more bumpy. And I think this illustrates what we were talking about earlier, is you don't have as much focused time on these devices. Maybe here there's a little bit longer of a period when you're on the couch in the evening or something like that, but there is a difference, right? And there's an even bigger difference when you look at other forms of devices like the iPad. So when do people on the iPad read? Well, they read in bed. It's only mobile web articles, I swear. It'll be very interesting. Have different use cases, but right now what this tells me, at least in the context of this data, is it's a home device and it's a casual device. Right? It's a downtime thing. Maybe it's in the morning when you're having breakfast, and then maybe later when you're in bed or on the couch, that's when you pull this thing out. We'll see how that changes over time. Now, granted, this is reading data, so we can look at other data. There's a personal or a professional network service called LinkedIn. Right? This is overall LinkedIn usage, and you could tell that basically somewhere starting around 8 a.m. is when usage peaks, and then it dwindles off around 2, and then it starts to fade as people go home. That's their overall use. This is their mobile use, which is kind of interesting because there's a little bit of use, and then it sort of jumps at night. Right? What the hell are these people doing? Personally, I think LinkedIn would love it if what they were doing is being out networking in the evening, looking up the people that they have meetings with, sharing business card information, that kind of stuff. But depending on the domain and depending on what your use cases are, you may see different kinds of variations. But the interesting thing is, in most of the data that I've seen, there is a variation. Right? Whether it's reading something later or whether it's using LinkedIn, the mobile usage is different than the desktop usage. Another example of this service, of this kind of usage data, which I don't have the particulars around, but I have the general data for, is that real estate service Zillow. People that use the mobile devices primarily use it in the evenings and on the weekends on mobile. Right? Usage of mobile for Zillow spikes on the weekends. And then it goes down for the rest of the week, and desktop usage sort of spikes. And the reason for that going on is because people are out in neighborhoods looking at houses they want to buy, and that's how they're accessing the data. Right? So it's a different trend than we see here, but it's still a contrast between desktop, netbook usage and mobile usage. So I think these are interesting things that sort of bound the conversation around mobile. We got less room to work with. That forces us to focus. We have to make things faster. That forces us to make things performant in general. And we have these different modes of usage that define different ways to think about why people pull out these devices. Now, the next thing I want to talk about after constraints that give us this focus is stuff that allows us to do new cool things. Looking out here, you guys all seem a little geeky to me. If that's an insult to you, I'm sorry. For me, that's a badge of pride, right? And geeks like new things that do cool stuff. Yes? No? Okay, I like cool things that do new stuff. And so the cool things that we have in these devices that allow us to do new stuff are these capabilities. And they allow us to rethink standard problems people have in the world or new problems people have in the world and solve them in interesting ways, in ways that we couldn't before. So capabilities like things like touch. Even back in 2009, there was 1 million touch screens making their way into people's hands in 2009. That's 1 million people per day that can now interact with the web with their fingers, right? And so the question becomes, well, can they interact with your website with their fingers? These stats are a little dated. I'm going to give you the updated stats. As of 2 days ago, 400,000 Android devices are activated daily, and about 250,000 iOS applications per day are activated, which is crazy, right? While I stand here today, 1 million people have access to the web with their fingers. And you think about, well, what about stuff that traditionally hasn't had that have a lot of indirect manipulation things like trackballs, keyboards, trackpads, keypads, all that fun stuff. Like the Nokia BlackBerry sides of the world, they have direct manipulation now, and then there's still a little indirect manipulation happening here and there. But the general trend of make the whole screen interactive is probably a good thing. I know we have some of our friends from RIM here, so I won't tell the story about how they made their first touchscreen phone, the Storm, and why it wasn't so great. Catch me after the break. But if you look at a device manufacturer like Nokia that still ships the most devices in the world, the dark green is how many of their devices support touch. And with this announcement, I'm guaranteeing you there's going to be more things out there that are supporting touch. All right? So touch is something that we start to care about because we want to tackle new capabilities with it. And this is still emergent things, but I think it's worth pushing the boundaries here a little bit. So this is Yahoo Mail on the mobile web. You swipe to the side, and you get all these little shortcuts for what to do with your email. You pull down, and you have the ability to search within here. Some of these things are not discoverable yet, right? And so they have a little feature overview, or they do a little animation, or they give you a tip. But the kind of canvas we have to play with now through touch is very unique. Contrast, the way somebody interacts with photos on the iPad. You want to move the list of photos, move the list of photos. You want to see what's inside, touch that list of photos, right? There you go. Just expand that. Now you want to move it, don't touch a scroll bar, don't click on an icon or a pointer, move the list. You want to see a photo, touch that photo. You want to get rid of it, push it to the side. Right? These are direct interactions with content where the content becomes the user interface, where we reduce the amount of Chrome on crap. The whole WIMP paradigm of windows, icons, menus, pointers. Who spends their entire day currently on their laptop clicking on little windows and icons? A double click to open folder representation of document, right? Move window to right, move window to left. We spend all our time moving these little freaking panels and dialog windows around instead of interacting with the actual stuff that we want. And when you get to this point where you can all of a sudden make the stuff the interaction, right? Make the UI the content, I think it's really exciting. My friend Josh Clark, who wrote this great book, Tapworthy, sort of illustrates it well. And I think sometimes what he says here, buttons are a hack, can be seen as confrontational. I don't necessarily see it that way. But it is a challenge, right? There are not necessarily such clear standards out there, but the standards emerge from us trying new things. If we never try new things, no new conventions emerge, and we're going to end up making web pages that work the way you use a keyboard and mouse to interact with them on surfaces when we can use 10 fingers to interact with them. I don't think that makes much sense. To me, that's the same thing as taking a print document and putting it online, right? Oh, okay, I know how to do graphic design on a poster, so I'm just going to put that in the web browser. It's the same thing as saying, okay, I know how to use a keyboard and mouse cursor to interact with a web page. I'm just going to put that on a mobile browser where you can use 10 fingers, right? And I'm sure many of you remember how many conversations we had about the web is not print. It's like a 10-year battle. So touch is a capability that I think is exciting. Other capabilities that I think are exciting is stuff like location. And this is an obvious one. Just here's Kayak on the mobile web. mobile web experience of kayak. Shoot me if I say mobile website ever, right? Because that's a loaded conversation. This is a mobile optimized experience for kayak's reservation system. And what you can do is just hit a button and it'll go find hotels near you, right? A decent smartphone has multiple ways of finding itself. When you're indoors, you can get around 50 meters because of Wi-Fi beacons. When you're outside, it take a little longer, but you can get GPS down to 10 meters. On the desktop, we knew with 99% accuracy that we are in the Netherlands now. Yay. You can do very interesting things in the browser with this. This is a service called Glimpse, and this is their mobile web experience. And what it shows is in real time where someone is. They send you a quick SMS message that says, I'm coming to meet you. And then you can see them moving down the road in the web browser and come outside to greet them with a lovely flower package or something. But these are just two capabilities. I only talked about touch and location. There is a whole pile of things that are at our disposal. And so if you start designing your website or service on the desktop, you can say, oh, well, I know with 99% accuracy the country someone's in. That's not a very rich palette to design with. Whereas if you start on mobile first and you say, hey, I know down to 10 meters where someone is, I think you can create some more interesting stuff. Start coupling this with some of these other capabilities and things get even more interesting. So there's a capability to detect the orientation of the device. We can just make sure things work. We can also use that as an opportunity to make things better. So this is email on an Android device. You flip it to the side, and instead of cutting off the space, they give you a real big area to write your email, a bigger keyboard, and they move the button to the right. So they took this little capability of knowing the orientation of the device, and they used it to create a better design, a better experience, as opposed to a worse one. And this isn't just in, our smartphones. This is a little notebook called the little notebook called the Little. And it has an easel mode that you can detect. So how would you change the interface of your cooking application if somebody flips it like this? Has anybody tried to cook using their laptop in the kitchen? All of a sudden, pasta sauce is hitting it, and it's terrible. But here, we could totally change the interface if we wanted to when somebody flips this mode. We could totally change the interface if we wanted to if somebody flips into this mode, for our how-to website. Using orientation, we can rethink even the most basic tasks on the web. Something as stupid as reading an article, right? Let's use the accelerometer to totally change how people read articles. So there's a tilt scrolling feature in this application called Instapaper. You just tilt the device to start reading at whatever pace you like. You want to read faster? Tilt it faster. You want to move backwards? Move it the opposite way, right? So here we've taken a single capability, sort of the device accelerometer capability, and we've rethought how people read content. And you can get access to some of these things inside the mobile web browser too. This is a snow globe built inside of iPhone 4 Safari, and you shake it. I'm not shaking it because I had a hard time recording that, but you can kind of make this happen. Here is access to the gyroscope, 360 degrees of motion in the iPhone 4 mobile Safari. You move the device like this, and you can do a full panoramic span of images. So now all of a sudden we're interacting with content by moving our devices around. How would you interact with this on a desktop? Well, you got a mouse cursor, and they'll probably put like 5 buttons on here, right, left, up. We resort to buttons, and we resort to things that are optimized for the mouse. Here, just move the device in whatever direction you like. So if we combine some of these things, and I think this is where it gets really exciting. Let's take the fact we know where you are on a map. Let's take the fact that we have directional orientation through a digital compass. So we know where you are, we know the direction you're facing, we have device orientation, and we can take common use cases and rethink the experience for them. When I was in London, I was going to find some sites to go tour, so I pulled up the Google on my laptop, I searched for tube, I landed here. Somebody thought a lot about the IA, somebody made all the links blue, somebody used white space to help me find the tube map. So they applied a lot of desktop design best practices. I click on tube map, ooh, that looks like a map. Look, they did a nice job of telling me it's a PDF. They told me how big it is, 0.2 megabytes. That really helps me understand how long it's going to take, right? Because 0.2 megabytes is actually probably less than this entire page. Anyway, I click on it, and okay, now I'm finding the nearest train station near me, so I can go tour around, right? This is, you guys laugh, this is the state of the art of the web. Pages, search engines, this stuff was magical, right? It was absolutely magical that I could type tube map into the Google and all of a sudden I get a map of where I'm going. How do we do this? With a competent mobile application. This is nearest tube. I just turn it on and it tells me all the stations relative to my position in the world and the direction I'm facing. Now, I want more detail about some of this stuff. I just tilt the application up. It gives me a bigger picture view, tells me the lines it serves, gives me the exact distance away from me that this train station is. I tilt it up even higher, and all of a sudden I get that same level of detailed information about stuff further away from me, right? Same use case. I want to find the nearest tube station near me. This application is even called Nearest Tube, right? I mean, the name is what it does. Same exact thing I tried to do on the desktop. And it ends up looking some kind of augmented reality shenanigans thingy like this. I'm not suggesting that this experience is better than the desktop experience, because they both have usability issues, design issues, probably technical issues. But man, is it different, right? Could the two ways of solving the same problem be any more different? And how did they end up being so different? Well, they ended up being so different because inside of these mobile devices, we have capabilities like location detection, digital compass, orientation changes, right? Access to the video camera, so we can overlay digital information based on your current view of the world. I'd like to repeat that phrase. Overlay relevant digital information based on your current view of the world. That's some crazy stuff, right? I'm here, I'm looking in this direction. This is the digital information from the entire world that's currently relevant to me. Yeah, that's cool. And you may think some of this augmented reality stuff is kind of a parlor trick, which is exactly what the guys at Yelp thought when they implemented their little augmented reality feature, because you had to shake the phone 3 times to actually activate it and all that. But when they looked at what was happening, they actually saw that it boosted sustained traffic by a pretty big margin. So this little Easter egg thing turned out to be something that I think starts to pave the way to different ways of interacting with digital information in the real world. And to ground ourselves a little bit, that was the Nearest Tube was a native app, so it's got access to this stuff. We can only get half of that in a decent mobile web browser right now. That said, hopefully things start changing, and if the Android WebKit team does what they promise they will do, we'll have things like HTML media capture that allows web apps to access audio, image, video capture capabilities of the device and actually grab things from the camera or the photo library, right? And maybe over time we can push the barriers even further to do things like interacting with real objects, like we can kind of do right now by scanning things. You scan something, it tells you what it is, tells you how much it costs on the web, tells you how good it is, tells you where it is near you, and then points to a map. Here's where you are, here's where you can go buy the thing. And forget scanning the barcode, just take a picture of it. It'll give you the same information, right? And it's not just with media objects. Google took all these little QR codes, stuck them on the top places people were searching for. You go and see one of these things, point your camera at it, it tells you this is the restaurant, this is how good it is, this is the phone number, here's what they serve. Google's sort of gone hog wild with this. Point your Google goggles and now Google search tool on the iPhone at a book, goes and finds it for you. Point it at wine, it tells you all the information it has on it. Point it at a business card, it'll use OCR to scan the text, put in your address book. Point it at a work of art, it'll tell you what you're looking at. So if you have an art history degree, I'm very sorry. Point it at a monument, it'll use location and the picture to go identify it for you. If you have a geography degree, I'm very sorry for you. Point it at foreign language text, it'll use OCR to scan it in and translate it for you. If you have a foreign language degree, I'm very sorry for you. And my favorite, this is WordLens. You point it at a sign and it translates to the language you understand on the real world, right? Takes a text, writes it on the thing you're looking at in the language you understand. This is some pretty cool, nerdy stuff, right? And here's another one of my favorites. This is an app called Recognizer. You point it at somebody, uses image recognition technology from Polar Rose to identify that person and tell you information about them on the web. My favorite creepy quote from Mr. Eric Schmidt, now chairman of Google, formerly CEO of Google, was, "We have technology that can identify you with 7 pictures of yourself." That's not the creepy part. What he said afterwards was the really creepy part, because he said, "You don't think there's 7 pictures of you on the internet?" Creepy dude, right? By the way, Apple bought this company, Polar Rose, and Polar Rose has this FaceLib library for accurate mobile face detection and recognition. What's happening in iPhone 5, iPhone 6? I don't know. Nokia's been trying to brand this, way to interact with the real world using digital information. They call it point found. When I see somebody walking around with their camera like this, I say nerd found. Because frankly, I need to find a place to eat. Watch out for Cleons. But I'm excited by things like near-field communications and RFID readers, radio frequency ID tags, which are essentially digital barcodes. Here's an iPhone where somebody snapped an RFID reader to it. You point it to an object that's broadcasting its identity through a radio frequency ID, and it starts playing media from that cartoon. You put it next to the hippo, it starts playing hippo video. You put it next to the car, it starts playing car video. Right? So here, all of a sudden, we can start interacting with the real world just by kind of putting our phones near things. And man, that's going to make check-in a lot easier instead of going through all this, find the location. Facebook had an event called F8 where they had little RFID tags on rooms, and you just sort of put your phone near it, and it checks you in there, right? And the Nexus S that Google released recently has NFC, and at Google I/O they had a couple panels about NFC. I think a lot of people are finally doing something here. I'm still of the mindset that until Apple turns it into a consumer product, it's just going to be a little bit of talk, because frankly, that's what they do, because we've had these capabilities for a while, but we'll see. I'm optimistic. So now we talked about multi-touch, location detection, device positioning, orientation. We talked a little about the gyroscope. We didn't talk about audio. We talked about video and image. I didn't even mention the fact that there's dual cameras on a lot of these devices now. I've seen startups that do makeovers on the iPad 2. Right? So you sort of point the iPad 2 at yourself. You can change your hairstyle. You can change your outfit. I mean, that's using the capability of the fact that you got a front-facing camera. Device connections through Bluetooth. If anybody caught what Google I/O was talking about recently, they're really pushing connections to other to other devices, things that augment the phone, and they're talking all this home automation stuff. I encourage you to look at it. But lots of things that we have, and more things that we will have. So again, if you start with mobile first, you have access to all this stuff. In the desktop right now, we've got 1 or 2 of these things, maybe, right? Maybe 3 or 4 if you're lucky. I saw that Google Chrome, somebody showed me yesterday, has a little camera, a little microphone icon where you can talk into Google Translate to try and translate things. So there's some stuff happening, but we don't have nearly the amount of stuff that we have on mobile to start working with. So to summarize this and take a couple questions here, because we're getting to the 50-minute mark. Why do I think mobile first makes sense? Why are you guys all in a position to change the world since you're working on mobile? One is there is a ton of growth happening in this space. The mobile web is growing 8 times faster than the desktop web grew. If anybody remembers the growth of AOL, it was basically doubling every 100 days. Things are happening 8 times faster now, right? And that opportunity isn't just an opportunity to ride out a whole bunch of new users. There's a shift in use of what's the dominant way to access the web. It's already starting, even though smartphone penetration is low and other mobile device penetration is relatively low. Not only is this shift in use happening, but there's new uses emerging, new ways for people to interact with digital information throughout the world. Mobile has some really compelling constraints that I think push you towards good design. Things like screen space, where you got to get rid of 80% of the crap you shoved into your website. That is good. The fact that you have to deal with even slower and less consistent network connections, so you really got to focus on performance. That is good, right? All of these different use cases that happen from having a device in the real world, using it anywhere and everywhere, using it at any time. I think thinking about your services, how can they be used anywhere and everywhere and any time? That is good for design. Forces you to focus and prioritize. And then we have all these fancy-pantsy capability things that allow us to start from people's real needs, right? I need to find a train station, and apply new ways to solve those kinds of problems. It's not about the technology first, right? It's about the fact that I need to go find the train station. How can I help somebody do that utilizing the new things that are available in these devices increasingly? And those three things together, I think, paint a very compelling picture for thinking about mobile first. So if you have questions, tweet me, find me on the interwebs. And because I think you guys are cool, I made a special page for you on a little startup I've been working on, which is essentially things geeks like to use. And you can go here, and there's an open invite for you for the next day or two during the conference, because we're in a closed beta. So if you have any feedback, I would love to hear you tell us how we don't know what the hell we're doing, so we can learn something. Thank you very much. I'll take questions. Looks like there's one in the back and one over here. They have microphone runners. That's fantastic.
So is that a special URL for mobile, or mob is just for mobilism?
Mobilism. I didn't want to force people to spell mobilism. It'll work on mobile for you. Other questions? Yeah, in the back.
Thanks. Hi. If you had this presentation on mobile first, my question is, what is your opinion on the responsive design trend?
There are people more capable than myself of explaining the different ways we can build front-end technologies to accommodate multiple devices. But that said, I believe the idea of having something that can adapt to what a device can do in general is a good approach. And over time, it may be the only thing that sustains us. How you solve that technically, whether you solve that with media queries, fluid grids, and fluid images, that may be a solution. You can solve things on the server, or you can solve things lots of different ways. So I don't have a strong, this is the only way to do it.
Okay,
stance.
thank you.
I was just wondering if you showed the slide with the desktop usage at night. How does that compare? Does it also include laptop usage? Because probably a few years ago, lots of people used to take their laptop to bed and read on that.
So the computer usage includes laptops, netbooks, and desktops in both those data points. The LinkedIn one was overall use, and then only mobile use. And the read it later, when they say computer users, they count desktop, laptop, and notebook. And in general, when you see the data around like smartphone sales overtaking personal computer sales, in personal computers, they count laptops, notebooks, and desktops. Up here. Two runners competing for the mic. It's nice.
Hi. In your comments regarding screen size, right, a lot of it is more business-oriented, like legal and marketing getting their hands on it, rather than design gone wild. As the mobile web is getting more capable with higher displays, higher resolution displays, and bigger displays, we're getting 4 inches and maybe 5 inches, right? Mm-hmm. What tells you that that type of trend is not going to happen on mobile as well? That particular constraint is eventually, in the next coming years, just disappear.
Hopefully, I'm trying to see if I have a slide on this on me. I don't. But hopefully, the constraint does not disappear entirely, because we're still bound by the ergonomics of what can fit in your pocket. If anybody has tried to put a Samsung Galaxy Tab in their pocket, right? If you wear painter's pants, yeah, maybe. Or you can have it kind of half stick out your butt, like in the commercials. Mm-hmm. But it's not something that's very conducive to carrying around with you. So until we get like roll-up displays, or until we get heads-up displays,
right?
And things like that. And then even with the things like heads-up displays, there's a certain amount of cognitive load that ultimately sort of bounds how much can you take in when it's in your face. Yep. That hopefully puts some constraint in.
So I think the differences are around being utilitarian primarily for the applications in mobile.
And that's what makes it focused.
Presentation.
Yeah, I like that distinction. I think the fact that when you think about designing for mobile, you think about the fact that somebody can use it in the real world to accomplish a real task, forces you to focus more on utilitarian use cases as opposed to shove content in their use cases.
You don't want to get sued because someone got run over by a car because they were reading the legal disclaimer.
Yeah, well, that is true. There is always lawyers, and lawyers will always try and put stuff inside of our web. Actually, it's not just lawyers, it's everybody, right? Every group has their sort of bias, and that's why we end up with so much stuff. But the sheer fact that we can put so much stuff in there doesn't constrain us as much as the fact that we can't, right? Okay, thank you very much. I'll be around for the conference. Come up, talk to me, and enjoy.